seen the headlines with the BJP in recent days, and we are very fortunate to have with us Mr. Arun Jaitley, a critically important BJP leader of opposition in the Rajya Sabha, a former Minister for Law and for Commerce, a razor-sharp lawyer, not a good man to argue with. Speaking to him, Rajdeep Sardesai, who we all know, but not just as the face on television. He built up the CNN-IBN channel out of nothing. It didn't even exist until a few years back. Rajdeep, Mr. Jaitley.
Let me say, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's a great honor and privilege to be back in Oxford, almost 25 years to the day since I passed out. And it was a great joy this morning walking around and seeing some young potential lawyers in sub-fuss going to exams. The joy of 25 years later not having to think of exams and jurisprudence can lift all of us at every time. It is, as I said, a privilege to be in Oxford. It's a privilege to have the leader of the opposition, Arun Jaitley, with me. What we're going to address is an issue which I again believe is central to the India story, which is our parliamentary democracy. And is Indian parliamentary democracy in some kind of a crisis? Now, in 1952, an editor of a Chennai paper once said that Indian elections, the first Indian elections, was the greatest gamble in history. Sir Winston Churchill, a short while before that, had predicted doom for the Indian democratic experiment. Obviously, Churchill didn't go to the right college and the right university, which is one reason why he got it so terribly wrong. And as a result, we're just about heading to our 16th general elections in a few months, if the Congress wants it, in an even shorter time if the BJP wants it. But either way, we are heading to an election sometime in the next 12 months, and more Indians will certainly vote than ever before. So the image will be of a parliamentary democracy which is robust and certainly going to survive. What is the bigger question is that under that robustness and survival instinct, is there a certain hollowness which is creeping in? These are some of the issues that we need to confront. And who better than one of India's best parliamentarians and one of India's most eminent lawyers and now leader of the opposition in the Rajya Sabha, Mr. Arun Jaitley.
Well, thank you very much, Rajdeep. You've defined the subject as a serious challenge to India's parliamentary democracy. You referred to the 1952 elections. The 1952 elections, I am told, took 8 months to be completed because democracy was a very slow-moving process at that time. Now we have the ability to do it in a couple of days. I may be in opposition, but and I am critical of the government, but let me tell you, I am a very enthusiastic and a proud Indian, and I have no reason to doubt not only the credibility but the longevity of India's parliamentary democracy. When India got independence in the first 2-3 decades, there was an academic debate whether we did select the best system. I think that debate has been concluded. The principal agenda and the concern in the first 2 or 3 decades after independence was sovereignty, unity, whether the country will be sustained together, how do we fight poverty. Of late, there's been a gradual shift. Different kinds of aspirations have built up. I think the concerns of unity, sovereignty are long over. Federalism is a big concern. Regional aspirations is a big concern, and that's the evolving agenda. And that's why there are many like me, and I think that's an overwhelmingly large number of Indians who do believe that despite all the problems we have in India, and we are a country of several problems, new ones will come up, parliamentary democracy perhaps is not only the best, but the only suitable system for the Indian setup. India is like a puzzle. You have different kinds of people. When I meet people from across the border in Pakistan, my food habits and my personal food habits and language is closer to them than perhaps somebody living in the east or in the south of India. But then I have a better connectivity with people in my own country, because despite all these divergences, tribes, communities, religions, regions, languages, Parliament today has become a forum where different political groups, different aspirational groups now find a mode of getting into the decision-making process of Parliament. Thank you.
I'll open it up to the audience in just a moment. Just a couple of points. Mr. Jaitley, in the last Lok Sabha session, the budget session, 51% of the time of our parliament was lost because of disruptions and adjournments and walkouts. I mean, the general impression is, as a result, was that MPs come to parliament, shout and go home. Is there a complete breakdown in relations between the government and the opposition? I know they call it gridlock in the West, but this seems something even worse, because this seems a complete lack of faith between the government and the opposition on a daily basis, which is affecting parliamentary democracy. Why is it happening, and do you have a solution to it?
You see, this whole issue of parliamentary obstructionism, I have not the least hesitation in saying that I'm personally uncomfortable about it. But then to get rid of this parliamentary obstructionism, you need to have certain level of fairness in the communication of the government and the actions of the government. Now, once that fairness is lacking, the parliamentary system itself gets threatened. Now, 2 sessions of parliament in the last 4 or 5 years have been completely washed out because of obstructionism. The first, if you remember, was the winter session of 2010, when the 2G telecom scam, the spectrum scam came out. We expected the government to act. Now, I can tell you, it was unfortunate that the session was lost. But as a result of that obstructionism, you had the CBI jumping into action, you had the minister being arrested, you had the concerned people being arrested, you then had the Joint Parliamentary Committee being instituted, and then you had the Supreme Court jumping into action and then saying all these licenses are cancelled. Now, but for that kind of a protest, now these are mostly actions which the government could have initiated on its own on day one. The government did it after the session was lost. The last session was lost. Why was the last session lost? Because you had one minister in the midst of an appointment scandal. You had another minister who was trying to get the CBI report on the coal scam doctored. Now, the opposition wanted them to go. The government allowed the whole session to be wasted, and the day the session concluded, they allowed them to go the next day. Now, if the government had been fair in both these cases, I think a lot of work could have been done. And the food bill, rather than this debate of ordinance or special session, perhaps could have been passed a month and a half ago.
But you do admit that you sometimes feel frustrated in Parliament.
Now, personally speaking, I would prefer a debate. But then, when you are pushed into a situation where there is a stalemate, I think the answer to the stalemate is not merely to ask the opposition, why do you do it? I think if the government had a little foresight and had taken these actions on day 1 or day 3, rather than 10 days after the parliament session, perhaps we could have saved a lot of time.
It's interesting. Most Indian parliamentarians love to debate in television studios, not in parliament itself. But that's another question. The other issue you raised was the ugly politician and the image of the ugly politician. And you suggested one of the problems we have is that funding remains invisible. Sources of funding of elections in particular remain invisible. What is the solution in your view? Is it state funding of elections? How am I going to get good people to enter politics if as I said, the entry barriers are put so high because of money which is illegally got?
You see, the state funding of elections is a possible answer, but I don't think it will solve the problem. We had what we call the Indrajit Gupta Committee report during the United Front government, which had recommended this. Now, and everybody as a routine says you have state funding and all the problems will be solved. People will take the taxpayers' money, which will be state funding, spend that money, and then collect their own funds and spend them over and above that. So the state funding itself won't solve the problem. When we were in government, the Congress party had appointed a committee then under Dr. Manmohan Singh. He was then the leader of opposition in the upper house. And he came out with a very interesting report. And in the report, he suggested that we must legitimize all political funding. We must offer tax soaps to people who donate to political parties. I personally went and met him. I was looking after the Election Commission as a law minister. And with the concurrence of the Congress party, we brought changes to the income tax law, to the Representation of People's Act, and all the laws. And together we passed all those amendments to each one of the rules. Therefore, the legal regime in India, which was jointly introduced at the suggestion of Dr. Manmohan Singh by me in government at that time, today gives huge incentives to people who donate lawful money to political parties. Unfortunately, whenever we've gone to individuals or to industry for donations, and I'm sure this is also the experience of other political parties, except the left, everybody else supported the system. The left never wanted to be pushed into a situation where the disclosure is made that they also take money from big business. So they obviously couldn't have supported the system. And whenever we've gone to them, people have moved a little. For instance, a very large number of very good business houses have set up trusts. And those trusts now, some of them have a fair basis. How many seats you won in the last election, we'll give you a donation on that per seat basis. So there's no arbitrariness. They put some very eminent public people as members of the trust. There are at least 10 to 15 business houses which have already done that. Now, if a number of them moved in this direction, and individual donations, small donors, large donors, I think if we were to encourage them, and a large part of the contribution, as it happens in England, as it happens in the United States, started coming by check, perhaps it'll make our parties and our elections much cleaner.
I appreciate your joining us. It's been wonderful to be here in Oxford, and it's been a privilege bringing India, in a sense, a slice of India and the best of India to Oxford. Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen.